Queen Helena loved nothing more than sitting by the crystal-clear waters of the great river. The gentle current's whisper had always brought her peace, especially now when she needed it most. Her swollen belly, heavy with child, made even the simplest movements challenging, but still she came to this sacred place. The cool breeze carried the sweet scent of wildflowers, and the afternoon sun painted golden ripples on the water's surface. "Just a few more days," she whispered, running her hands over her stomach. "Soon you'll be here, little one." The Queen had made this journey countless times over the past 9 months, always alone, always in secret. The guards would have insisted on accompanying her had they known, but Helena cherished these moments of solitude, away from the watchful eyes of the palace, away from her husband's stern gaze. She could simply be herself. King Marcus was not a man who understood such desires for solitude. He ruled the kingdom of Aldemir with an iron fist, and his reputation for swift, harsh justice had spread far beyond their borders. Even now, after 5 years of marriage, Helena sometimes caught herself measuring her words carefully in his presence, just like everyone else did. A sharp pain suddenly shot through her body, making her gasp. She clutched her belly, her eyes widening as she realized what was happening. "No, no, not here," she breathed, trying to stand. Another contraction hit, stronger this time, forcing her back down. "Help!" she called out, her voice echoing across the empty riverbank. "Someone, please." But no one came. She was too far from the palace, too far from the village, and the pain was getting worse. Helena's heart raced as she realized she would have to do this alone. "Stay calm," she told herself, remembering the midwife's instructions. "Just breathe." Hours passed like this, with Helena fighting through each contraction alone by the riverside. The sun began to set, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges as she gave one final push. The sound of a baby's cry filled the air, and despite her exhaustion, Helena felt a surge of joy. "Let me see you, my little one," she whispered, reaching for her child. But as she cradled the baby in her arms, her joy turned to shock. The words caught in her throat as she stared at her newborn son. The baby was white. Not merely pale or fair-skinned, but white as fresh snow. His hair, his skin, everything about him seemed to glow with an otherworldly radiance. Helena's hands trembled as she held him. "This cannot be," she whispered, her voice shaking. Both she and King Marcus had dark skin, as did most people in their kingdom. "How is this possible?" The baby cooed softly, reaching up with tiny fingers toward his mother's face. He was beautiful, perfect in every way, but Helena's mind was racing with terror. She knew her husband well enough to know how he would react. "Marcus will never believe me," she said, tears streaming down her face. "He'll think I've been unfaithful. She couldn't finish the thought. The king's punishment for adultery was death, even for a queen. The baby gurgled, his pure white skin seeming to glow in the fading daylight. Helena held him close, her heart breaking as she realized what she had to do. "I'm so sorry, my beautiful boy," she sobbed, "but I cannot take you to the palace. Your father, he would never understand. He would never let you live." With trembling hands, she tore a piece of her dress and wrapped the baby carefully. She kissed his forehead, memorizing his face, knowing she would never see him again. "May the gods protect you," she whispered, placing him gently in the calm waters of the river. The current was gentle here, and the basket she created from her dress kept him afloat. "I'm so sorry, my son. Please forgive me." Helena watched through tears as the river carried her child away. The baby didn't cry, he simply looked up at the darkening sky with curious eyes. When she could no longer see him, Helena forced herself to move. She couldn't return to the palace empty-handed. Questions would be asked, and she couldn't risk anyone discovering the truth. In the poorest part of the kingdom, where narrow streets wound between crumbling buildings, stood an orphanage run by an old woman named Magdalena. Helena had heard whispers about this place, about how unwanted children sometimes found new homes through discreet arrangements. "Please," Helena begged when she reached the orphanage, her voice desperate. "I need a baby boy, dark-skinned, healthy. I'll pay whatever you ask, but you must never speak of this to anyone." Magdalena studied the queen with knowing eyes. She had seen many desperate women in her time, though never one of such high standing. Without a word, she disappeared into the back room and returned with a baby boy. Perhaps a day old, with skin the color of rich earth. "His mother brought him this morning," Magdalena said softly. "She couldn't keep him." Helena took the child in her arms, relief washing over her. He was beautiful, perfect for her purpose. She pressed a heavy purse of gold into Magdalena's hands. "This never happened," Helena said firmly. "You never saw me." Magdalena nodded, tucking the gold away. "The queen has never visited this humble orphanage," she agreed. When Helena returned to the palace, cradling her new son, the celebrations began immediately. Servants rushed to spread the news, and bells rang throughout the kingdom. King Marcus strode into the chamber, his face breaking into a rare smile at the sight of his heir. "A son," he declared proudly, looking down at the baby. "He shall be called Prince Alexander." Helena smiled and nodded, playing her part perfectly, but inside her heart was breaking. As the palace erupted in celebration, she couldn't stop thinking about her true son, the white-skinned baby she had left to the river's mercy. Far downstream, as the stars began to appear in the night sky, the baby's makeshift basket began to sink. His tiny arms flailed as water began to seep in, his first cries of distress echoing across the river. A figure rose from the depths, moving with fluid grace through the water. Queen Marina, ruler of the Mer people, had been drawn to the surface by the sound of the baby's cries. Her luminescent tail shimmered as she lifted the child from the sinking basket. Who would abandon such a precious gift? She wondered aloud, cradling the baby close. His skin seemed to glow in the moonlight, unlike anything she had ever seen before. The baby began to struggle in her arms as she submerged, unable to breathe underwater. Marina quickly pressed her lips to his forehead, bestowing the gift of water breathing through her magic. The baby's legs shimmered and merged into a beautiful silver tail. "Welcome to your new home, little one," Marina smiled, watching the baby take his first underwater breath. "I shall call you Prince Lucas." In the underwater palace of the Mer people, Princess Diana, Marina's daughter, was the first to greet them. Her eyes widened at the sight of the unusual baby. "Mother, who is this?" Diana asked, swimming closer to examine the white-skinned child. "Your new brother," Marina replied, smiling as Lucas reached out to grab Diana's finger. "He was abandoned above, but the fates have brought him to us." Diana's face lit up with joy. "He's beautiful. Look how he glows." Indeed, Lucas seemed to emit a soft light that illuminated the water around him. As days passed, strange things began to happen in the underwater kingdom. The coral reefs, which had been slowly dying, suddenly burst with vibrant colors. Schools of fish returned to areas they had long abandoned, and the water itself seemed clearer and more alive. "It's the baby," the Mer people whispered among themselves. "He brings life wherever he goes." Marina watched these changes with growing wonder. She had heard the surface dwellers' legends of a special child born every 2 centuries, one whose presence would bring prosperity and peace. Could it be that this abandoned baby was that legendary child? Meanwhile, in the palace above, Queen Helena lived in constant fear. Every time King Marcus looked at Prince Alexander, she held her breath, worried he would somehow see through her deception. But the years passed, and Alexander grew into a strong boy, much like his father in both appearance and temperament. One evening, 15 years after that fateful day by the river, Helena found King Marcus alone in the palace gardens. His face was troubled, more serious than usual. "My king," she said softly, approaching him, "what troubles you?" Marcus didn't look at her as he spoke. "I have been reading the ancient scrolls," he said, his voice low. "Every 2 centuries, a special child is born to our kingdom. A child with skin as white as snow, blessed by the gods themselves." Helena's heart nearly stopped. "What do you mean, my king?" "The time has come," Marcus continued, his eyes distant. "The child should have been born during my reign. Yet we have not seen this blessed one." He turned to her suddenly, his gaze sharp. "Where is the child, Helena? What happened to the god's gift?" Before Helena could respond, he dismissed her with a wave of his hand. "Leave me. This is not a matter for women to concern themselves with." Helena hurried away, her mind racing with fear. After all these years, her secret was in danger of being discovered. As she paced in her chambers that night, she wondered if somewhere, somehow, her true son had survived. Deep beneath the waves, Prince Lucas had grown into a strong young man. His white skin still glowed with that same otherworldly light, and his presence had transformed the underwater kingdom into a paradise. He spent his days training with the Mere warriors, learning their ways of combat and strategy, while his sister Diana remained his closest friend and confidant. "Look what I found," Diana called out one morning, swimming quickly toward Lucas with something clutched in her hands. It was a glass bottle containing a scroll. "It's from the surface," Lucas said, taking the bottle carefully. "Should we show Mother?" They brought the bottle to Queen Marina, who read the message with growing anger. The scroll contained King Marcus's demands for the return of his son, threatening war if his wishes were not met. "So," Marina said, her voice tight with anger, "your true father has finally found you." Lucas stood tall, his silver tail flashing in the filtered sunlight that reached their underwater palace. "He may have sired me," he said firmly, "but you are my true parent. This is my home, and these are my people." Marina embraced her son, touched by his loyalty, but she knew King Marcus would not give up easily. A storm was brewing, one that would soon break the surface of their peaceful underwater world. And so began the great conflict between the people of land and sea, a battle that would test the bonds of family, the limits of pride, and the true meaning of belonging. But that is a tale for another time. As dawn broke over the kingdom of Aldemir, the morning mist rolled gently off the great river. King Marcus stood at its banks, his royal guards maintaining a respectful distance. The water was calm, betraying nothing of the magical realm that lay beneath its surface. 3 days, he muttered, watching the current flow past. "I have given them 3 days to return what is mine." Behind him, his chief advisor, Roland, cleared his throat softly. "Your Majesty, perhaps we could approach this differently. The Mer people saved your son's life. Without them, Marcus interrupted sharply, my son would be in his rightful place, learning to rule this kingdom." He turned to face Roland, his expression stern but not angry. "You have served me well for many years, old friend, but do not presume to tell me how to reclaim my own flesh and blood." In the palace dungeons below, Queen Helena sat in her chambers, not truly a prisoner, but not free either. The king had ordered her confined until he could decide her fate. Prince Alexander had been placed in the adjacent room, though he had done nothing wrong. The young prince spent his hours pacing, trying to understand why their world had suddenly turned upside down. "Mother," Alexander called through the wall that separated them, "why did you do it? Why did you give away your true son?" Helena pressed her hand against the cool stone wall, wishing she could reach out to the boy she had raised as her own. "I was afraid, my dear one. Your father, he was different then. Even more rigid, more unforgiving. I feared what he might do if he saw a child so different from us." "But I've heard the legends," Alexander said. "A white-skinned child is supposed to be a blessing from the gods. Surely father would have understood that." Helena closed her eyes, remembering that day by the river. "Fear doesn't listen to legends, my son. Fear only knows how to protect itself." Deep beneath the river's surface, Prince Lucas swam through the luminescent corridors of the underwater palace. The Mer people's architecture was a marvel of curved lines and organic shapes, with buildings that seemed to grow from the very coral itself. Everywhere he went, the water seemed to grow clearer, the colors more vibrant, his natural gift affecting the environment around him. "Lucas," Princess Diana called, swimming quickly to catch up with him, "where are you going?" "To see Mother," he replied, his silver tail flashing as he turned. "I need to understand more about what's happening." They found Queen Marina in her private gardens, where underwater flowers bloomed in impossible colors. She was speaking with her council of elders, all of them wearing concerned expressions. "The Surface King's ultimatum expires tomorrow," one elder was saying. "We must decide how to respond." Marina noticed her children approaching and dismissed the council with a gentle wave. As they swam away, she opened her arms to Lucas and Diana. "My beloved children," she said warmly, "come, sit with me." The underwater garden had seats formed from living coral, constantly growing and reshaping itself to be perfectly comfortable. As they settled, Lucas spoke first. "Mother, I need to know everything. About where I came from, about why I was abandoned. Please." Marina's face softened with compassion. "I only know what I saw that night, my dear one. You were floating in the river, wrapped in fine cloth that could only have come from the palace. Whoever left you there made sure you would be found." "By you," Diana added, taking her brother's hand. "You were meant to find him, Mother. I'm sure of it." Marina smiled at her daughter's certainty. "Perhaps. The rivers have always connected our two kingdoms, even though the surface dwellers rarely acknowledge our existence. But now their king demands your return, Lucas. He claims his right as your true father." Lucas's face hardened slightly. "He may have sired me, but he is not my father. You are my family, you, Diana, our people. I won't leave." "The choice must be yours," Marina said gently. "But remember, sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that affect others most deeply." Above the water, King Marcus was meeting with his own advisors in the palace's great hall. The chamber was quiet, tense with unspoken concerns. "Your Majesty," Roland ventured carefully, "there might be a way to resolve this without conflict. Perhaps, if you were to meet with the Mer Queen, to speak with her as one parent to another." Marcus, who had been staring out the window at the river, turned slowly. For a moment, his advisors feared his legendary temper would flare, but instead his face showed something unexpected: consideration. "A meeting," he said thoughtfully. "Yes, perhaps. But it must be on my terms. I am still the king." "Of course, Your Majesty," Roland agreed quickly. "Shall I prepare a new message, more diplomatic this time?" Marcus nodded slowly. "Do so. But remember, I am requesting a meeting, not begging for one." In her confinement, Queen Helena had finally fallen into an uneasy sleep when a soft voice woke her. "My queen," whispered one of her most trusted handmaidens, Marina, through a small window. "There's something you should know. The king, he's changing." Helena moved closer to the window. "What do you mean?" "He's agreed to meet with the Mer Queen, not to fight, but to talk. The chief priest says it's the prophecy working its magic. The special child is already bringing change, even from afar." For the first time in days, Helena felt a glimmer of hope. She remembered the gentle baby she had placed in the river, how peaceful he had looked even in that moment of abandonment. Could her son's very existence be powerful enough to soften his father's heart? The next morning, as the sun rose over the great river, two very different worlds prepared to meet. On the surface, King Marcus arrived with only his most trusted advisors, a show of peace that surprised everyone. Below the water, Queen Marina prepared to rise to the surface with Lucas and Diana at her side. "Remember," Marina told her children, "whatever happens today will shape the future of both our kingdoms. We must act with wisdom, not fear." As they rose through the water, Marina used her magic to create a space where both peoples could meet. A peaceful boundary between water and air where mere people could speak comfortably with surface dwellers. The water rose up around them like crystal walls, forming a magnificent chamber that straddled both worlds. King Marcus's eyes widened at the display of Mer magic, though he tried to hide his amazement. But when he saw Lucas, all pretense fell away. The young prince's white skin seemed to glow with an inner light, and even in his Mer form, his resemblance to Helena was unmistakable. "My son," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Lucas met his gaze steadily. "King Marcus," he replied formally, "I appreciate you choosing to meet peacefully." The king flinched slightly at the formal address, but before he could respond, Queen Marina spoke. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice carrying both warmth and authority, "we meet at last. I believe we have much to discuss." And so began a conversation that would change both kingdoms forever, not through conflict or force, but through understanding and the healing power of truth. The great river sparkled under the afternoon sun, its waters no longer a boundary between two worlds, but a bridge connecting them. In the crystal chamber where water met air, King Marcus sat with his head bowed, listening as Queen Marina told the story of how she had found and raised Lucas. "He was so small," Marina said softly, her eyes distant with memory. "So fragile, yet there was something special about him from the very first moment." Lucas, sitting between his two families, reached out and took Marina's hand. "You saved my life," he said. "You gave me a home, a family, a purpose." "A purpose you have fulfilled beyond all expectations," said Roland, the king's advisor, stepping forward. "Your Majesty," he addressed King Marcus, "the ancient scrolls speak of a blessed child who would bring prosperity to our kingdom. Look around you. Wherever Prince Lucas goes, life flourishes. The river runs clearer, plants grow stronger, even the air seems fresher." Marcus lifted his eyes to study his son. Lucas sat tall and proud, his white skin glowing with that strange, beautiful light. Here was the blessed child of prophecy. But more than that, here was his son, grown into a remarkable young man. "I have been a fool," Marcus said quietly. The words seemed to cost him great effort, but he continued. "My pride, my anger, they have brought nothing but pain to those I should have protected." In her secured chamber in the palace, Queen Helena waited anxiously for news. The door suddenly opened, and Alexander rushed in. "Mother," he called out excitedly, "Father has sent for us. We're to join them at the river immediately." Helena's heart raced as she followed her adopted son through the palace corridors. When they reached the river, they found the crystalline chamber still standing, a magnificent blend of mere magic and natural beauty. Inside, both royal families waited. Marcus stood as Helena entered. "My queen," he said, his voice gentler than she had ever heard it. "Please join us. There is much to be forgiven." Princess Diana, who had been quietly observing everything, swam forward. "In our kingdom," she said, "we have a saying. The current of forgiveness runs deeper than the river itself." Helena approached slowly, her eyes fixed on Lucas. 15 years had passed since she had last seen her firstborn son. He rose to meet her, his movements graceful even as his tail transformed into legs to stand on the chamber's dry portion. "Mother," he said simply, opening his arms. Helena rushed forward, tears streaming down her face as she embraced her son. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I was so afraid. Can you ever forgive me?" Lucas held her tight. "I forgave you long ago," he replied. "Fear makes us do things we regret, but love helps us heal from them." Alexander watched the reunion with mixed emotions until Lucas turned to him with a warm smile. "Brother," Lucas said, extending his hand, "we have much to learn about each other." As the two princes clasped hands, something remarkable happened. The water around them began to glow with a soft, pulsing light that spread outward from where they stood. The light traveled up the river and down, spreading like gentle ripples. "The blessing of the gods," Roland whispered in awe. "It recognizes both princes as true heirs." Queen Marina smiled knowingly. "Perhaps the prophecy was never about just one blessed child," she said. "Perhaps it was about bringing our two kingdoms together all along." King Marcus stepped forward, his royal bearing tempered now with humility. "Queen Marina," he said formally, "I owe you a debt that can never be repaid. You saved my son, raised him to be a fine young man, and in doing so, you may have saved me from myself." Marina inclined her head gracefully. "The river connects us all, King Marcus. Perhaps it's time we acknowledged that connection officially." And so, on that historic day, the first treaty between the Surface Kingdom and the Mer people was drafted. But it was more than just a political agreement. It was a promise between families, a bridge between worlds. The changes that followed were remarkable. Under Lucas's influence, the river's magic began to flow more freely into the surface world. Gardens bloomed with unprecedented vigor, crops yielded abundant harvests, and the very air seemed charged with vitality. The Mer people shared their knowledge of water magic, helping to prevent floods and droughts, while the surface dwellers offered their own gifts in return. King Marcus changed too. The hard edges of his personality softened, and he learned to rule with wisdom rather than fear. Queen Helena, freed from her burden of secrets, bloomed like a flower in spring, becoming a beloved figure in both kingdoms. Lucas split his time between both worlds, equally at home on land or in the water. He worked closely with Alexander, teaching him about the Mer people's ways while learning about surface customs in return. The two brothers became inseparable, their different backgrounds becoming a strength rather than a divide. Princess Diana took great joy in having a new extended family, often leading groups of young Mer people to the surface to learn about the world above. She became a bridge between the kingdoms in her own right, beloved by both peoples. One evening, as the sun set over the great river, the entire extended family gathered for a celebration. The crystal chamber had become a permanent structure, a symbol of unity between the kingdoms. Inside, Mer people and surface dwellers mingled freely, sharing stories and songs. "Look at them," Marina said to Marcus, watching as Lucas and Diana taught Alexander how to speak with dolphins. "Who would have thought our kingdoms could be so perfectly joined?" Marcus smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his once stern face. "I was blind to so much," he admitted. "I thought strength came from power, from control. But true strength comes from understanding, from forgiveness." Helena, sitting nearby with a group of Mer children gathered around her, looked up. "And from love," she added softly. "Above all, from love." The years that followed brought unprecedented prosperity to both kingdoms. The prophecy of the blessed child had indeed come true, but in a way no one had expected. It wasn't just Lucas's presence that brought blessing. It was the unity he inspired, the bridges he helped build between two worlds that had been separated for too long. Alexander grew into a wise and compassionate ruler in training, while Lucas became known as the guardian of two realms, honored in both kingdoms. Together, the brothers ensured that the peace their families had built would last for generations to come. Princess Diana established the first school where children from both kingdoms could learn together, fostering understanding and friendship from an early age. The crystal chamber became its centerpiece, a place where young minds could explore the wonders of both worlds. King Marcus and Queen Helena ruled with renewed purpose, their love for each other stronger for having weathered such trials. They worked closely with Queen Marina to ensure that both kingdoms prospered, creating a golden age that would be remembered in legend. As for Queen Marina, she continued to rule her underwater realm with wisdom and grace, but now she had a much larger family to love and guide. She often said that the true magic of the river wasn't in its power to transform bodies, but in its ability to transform hearts. The story of the river child became a beloved tale in both kingdoms, told to children as a reminder that love knows no boundaries, that family is more than blood, and that the greatest magic of all lies in the power of forgiveness and understanding. And so the great river continued to flow, its waters carrying not just the lifeblood of two kingdoms, but the stories of countless lives touched by the miracle of understanding and acceptance. The legacy of the river child lived on, not just in legend, but in the daily lives of all who called these united realms their home.
Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed watching. Kindly click the subscribe button, like, comment, and share this video. Watch out for more intriguing and eye-catching videos from your favorite YouTube channel.